Welcome to the Book Fair podcast. My name is Anthony, and this week we have an interview with Sandra Magsamen, a look at some new releases. The Texas Reader Act is ruled unconstitutional, and a school district in Chicago is seeking remote learning alternatives for students in fear of ICE entering their schools. Let's start off with an interview with Sandra Magsamen. Good morning, Sandra. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. Nice to be here.
Can you start us off by introducing yourself and some of your work for the audience?
My name is Sandra Magsamen, and I have been an author and an illustrator for over 25 years now. I have written and illustrated over 100 books, mostly for children age 0 to 3 or 4. However, I have done a few picture books for kids who are 5 to 8 or a little bit older. I've also written a book for adults called Living Artfully. Some of the work that you might know, I Love You, Honey Bunny. I Love You Even When You're Crabby. Um, let's see. I Love You, Little Moose was just awarded the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval for Board Books for 2025. My books are all about connecting with our little ones. It's about love, about self-acceptance, about self-esteem, really forming that bond between a parent, a caregiver, a grandparent, or even an educator with a child, knowing that if our children feel secure and connected, that they belong, that they have the most chance and the optimal tools to grow to be who they're meant to be.
And you said that the main thing is about connecting with our little ones. In your experience in writing, what are some of the responses that you've gotten from uh, the adults that purchase your book, be they either parents, uncles, aunts, educators, or grandparents?
Well, I get a lot of feedback and I love it and I encourage it. And I love when people write me and tell me their stories. One thing that I'm known for in the children's publishing industry is that I create a lot of board books that have what we call a novelty component. And to the rest of us, what that means is I have a board book, I Love You, Honey Bunny. And the book doesn't stop at the top of the rectangle that the book is. It has ears that protrude above it. So, or a tail with, I love you, little stinker. There's the tail, of the skunk. Or with the crab, there's the crab claws that come out at the top of the book. And what that does, when a adult is reading with a child, it allows the adult and the child to snuggle up next to each other and interact with that book in a three-dimensional way. So I describe it as like a stuffed animal and a book got married and they have this amazing, relationship. So they're three-dimensional and it allows a child to have something to hold on to and engage in that book. So it makes reading even more engaging and connected, and there's an interactivity. The other thing, every single book I do in some way talks about caring for one another, kindness, thoughtfulness, all the ways that we say I love you in every single everyday ways. So I can remember one email that I got that I just touched my heart. I wrote a book called I Rough You, rough being exchanged for the word love. And this family wrote me and they said that they never say I love you anymore. They only say I rough you. And that like really touched my heart. I love that. So giving people new ways to say I love you.
I worked in children's theater for 10 years, and in the early 2010s, they started doing sensory friendly performances. This was something that was relatively new to live theater, and it was for people that were on the autism spectrum or with sensitivity issues. So there were things like leaving the lights on in the house instead of going dark, uh, lowering the volume for people that have auditory issues. And anytime you throw a curveball at actors, there was always some sort of pushback. But I remember the first time we did the show, we opened it up to um, basically anybody, and we were looking for feedback. And there was a family, and I'll never forget this moment, who was talking to the director of the show, who really spearheaded doing sensory friendly performances. And there was a little like 3-year-old girl kind of sheepishly hugging the mom's dress, and then about 5 feet away from them was about a 10-year-old boy who was being more expressive. He was moving and he was making noises while they were talking. And I was just in earshot of them, and I heard the mom say, this was the first time we've been able to do something as a family. And that is the level of connection that I
Yes.
really it makes me so proud of what I do. And so hearing you talk about having that connection with the little ones and reading to children is so important and so beautiful. I love that passion. And you talked a lot about the physical component of it, giving them something to grab onto. Do you have any experience with, developmental, education, anything like that?
Yeah, my master's degree is in art therapy. So I'm trained as an art therapist, which really gives me quite an in-depth background in child development. So the way that I work as an artist and an author really pulls from all of that knowledge and understanding that in the first 3 years of a child's life, the brain of an infant grows at its greatest capacity and speed at any time in their life. It's developing all of those connections and neurons, and everything's firing faster and stronger than ever it will ever do again in our lifetime. So the more we can engage children in sensory experiences at that young age, we just absolutely give food to the brain and help that child grow, extensively. So it couldn't be more important. And like this book that we're doing right now called Silly Witch are jokes for kids to tell. And the reason why that is so important is that it helps build self-esteem and confidence and agency. And again, it's another way to connect. When a child sits at the dining room table or with their friends at school, or on the bus or wherever they are, and they will first, if they can't read, they will memorize every joke in the book right away. Like the second read, they know them all. And then they then take those jokes to their family and their friends and their school kids. And they all of a sudden are connecting and belonging in this way where they're the leaders and they've got the answer. And it is so powerful to see how that kind of activity can really give a child self-esteem and really help them get out there and show who they are.
And all of that, comes from this right here, the Silly Witch, which, I gotta say that anybody that sees this on the shelf, they're not gonna understand that entire history that goes behind it. Can you talk a little bit about what was it in art therapy that drove you uh, to becoming an author and an illustrator?
Yeah. So I worked for many years in different settings as an art therapist. I worked with children who were deaf. In fact, I wrote my thesis about when you cannot use words, how does one communicate, connect, um, and feel like they belong? I worked with folks who had various degrees of depression and anxiety. I worked in nursing homes where certainly depression, anxiety, and isolation existed among folks who had dementia. And I worked with criminally insane men who were imprisoned in a psychiatric facility because they had committed crimes while they were psychotic. And that was a whole different kind of healing. But what I learned in all the populations and all the people that I worked with is that so often, mental health comes down to feeling isolated and removed and not having the ability to express what you really feel and to say that and connect with others. So I began writing down just sentences, the things that my patients in any population, in any group setting wanted to share, whether it was, I love you, or I'm sorry, or I believe in you, or I wish you'd believe in me, whatever these messages were, I began writing them down. And before I knew it, I started calling them messages from the heart. And they were the things that not just people who were called patients, who were classified in some way, or categorized or named, but all people want to belong. They want to connect. They want to feel love and they want to give love. And so I started working on using ceramic plaques that I made in the nursing home with the kilns that they had there because had kilns in our activity room. We were making Christmas trees and ornaments, but I started making ceramic plaques with these messages written on them that people wanted to share from one heart to another. And I'd bead them with all the old jewelry and junk that I found at, you know, flea markets and, old shops and antique stores. And before I put him in I was pregnant at the time with my daughter, who's now 37, filled a nursery with them. And my sisters would come in, they'd be like, "I need to give that, I need to say that." Or the friends would say, "Could you write me this one? Because I wanna give it to my mom." That would say, "Because you believed in me, mom, I believed in me." And before I knew it, I had this little business in my house in the basement because bought a little kiln, I unplugged the dryer and plugged in the kiln, and I was making messages from the heart plaque and selling them to all my friends and family and their friends and their families. And before I knew it, I started doing craft shows on the weekend. And that just grew into a business where I finally ended up renting a booth at the New York Gift Show, and I brought my work to the world. And there, I met publishers and people who said, "Well, could you write a book for a child?" Or "Can you extend this one line to a message from a grandmother to a child? A thank you one. Could you write a gift book about thanks and gratitude?" And so just kind of really following step by step, year after year, I really entered into the world of gifts and publishing and licensing. People wanted to start licensing my images and my work and my words, and that really developed a business. So I still feel like I'm still an art therapist, but now not with one person sitting in front of me or a group in front of me, but really with the world because my work goes everywhere now.
And so you took these very simple ideas, this working with people who may have developmental issues, working as an art therapist, taking these ideas like communicating simple lines like "I love you," things that people take for granted, and putting them to physical media like the heart plaques. When you were first approached about turning these into children's books, what was your response? Was it something that you were open to exploring at first?
Oh, absolutely. And I had already been writing poetry for years and years that I never ever thought I would share with anyone. It was the poem that I wrote when I was pregnant with my daughter, which has become probably our best-selling book, which is Welcome Little One. And it's all the promises that I it's a love letter to her. It's all the promises that I wanted her to know that I would honor and hold throughout her whole life. So I had poetry that were already small little books that were, just in my sketchbooks and my journals and places that no one knew about, nobody asked about because I wasn't in that arena to begin to share. I had books, about, thanking my mother and my grandmother and thank you books. And they were poetry, but that we were able to like begin to work with editors to create them into books. So I'm always, very open about sharing with parents who say, "Well, I've written a book for my child." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Get it down, share it with your child. If you want to share it beyond, go to a school and read it. If you don't know how to illustrate, you can go online and put pictures together now. There's so many images available, but make that book and share it because you just don't know who you'll touch with it. Of course, you'll touch your own child and your family, but it could have, messages and meaning that go far beyond your home and your family."
And so when you started doing these books, and especially starting with a poem that you had written for your daughter, what was it like when you were first getting published, raising a child who was the age that these books were being written for? What was your daughter's experience like seeing her mother working in this industry?
Well, when she was 12, I wrote a book called When I Grow Up, I Want to Be Me. And Scholastic was my first children's publisher at that point. I didn't publish Welcome Little One until much later. But when she was 11 when that book, my first book, was published. And she had come to me, and people were saying, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" And what will you be? And she's like, "Mommy, I have no idea how to grow up. I don't even know how to answer that. How do we grow up?" And I said, "The good news is that you have everything you need to be everything you want to be. You just have to celebrate who you are." And so I wrote this poem, "When I grow up, I want to be me." And Scholastic published it 25 years ago. And now they have reissued it. It has an anniversary edition that's just come out this year. And She loved it. She shared it proudly with her schoolmates. I went to school and read it. Because all of these kids at 12 were feeling the same way. They felt a lot of pressure. And it was really just this wonderful celebration of not to worry, to just fully be who you want to be and share that with the world. So she loved it. And today, my daughter works for me, and with me in our business. So she's part of our publishing company. So she's a great writer. She is a wonderful illustrator, and she is great in social media. She has so many skills that I don't have, not growing up as she did in a digital age. And it's been a wonderful, um, beautiful, expansion of our relationship to be partners in a business now. And I love it. And she has sort of grown up in the studio. My husband's an artist in his studio. She's grown up in the world of art, and also in nonprofits. She studied to work in nonprofits, and she understands, sort of the importance of creating projects and art that help others. And that's what she does.
So you talked about growing up in the world of arts, and earlier you had talked about how you started with ceramics, and Silly Witch includes little uh, stylistic things of like felt and physical media.
Yes.
Can you talk about including those aspects of something physical in the
Mhm.
book?
Yeah.
Not just like the actual physical component, but using the idea of felt and stitching as the artistic style.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. Um, so, as you know, the legs, there are actual three-dimensional legs that come out at the top of the book, the witch's legs with metallic purple and black stripes, and then her shiny, shiny black boots. But the art style itself is an illustration of a witch, and the witch is actually stitched. Like it looks like stitching is holding her down, like it's made by a piece of fabric. And most of the characters throughout the book are also stitched. And this technique came from my artistic work many years ago. I always loved embroidery, um, and I always loved creating things that were made from my hand. Um, and I would make things and give things to other people that were stitched and embroidered, crocheted, or knitted. I love that kind of tactile feel. Um, and how that started was when I was 12, I was on a farm. My parents we grew up on a farm, and I was in an accident on the farm, and I broke my leg very severely. And I was in the hospital for a long time. And then I was on a home and hospital school where I had a headphone, and I spoke to other children all over the state of Maryland who were either in very bad accidents or who had cancer. Um, and I was around 11, 12 years old. And at that point, my mother and my grandmother, I couldn't go to school. And they started buying me, this will date me, but there was a store called Woolworths, which was just a five and dime. And they would buy me these little kits that you could embroider like a smiley face that said, "Have a happy day," had messages on it and images. And so I would stitch them and send them back to school with my sisters to give to my friends. And they would make something and send it back to me. Maybe it was a like a wish catcher or a little note or a paper airplane with drawings on it. They would always make something, or a beaded bracelet, and they'd send it back to me. So very early on, I began to understand that I could communicate with objects that were handmade. And I didn't think of them as art back then, but it was handmade items that we were sharing back and forth with friends. And so this illustrative style, I think, really grew out of that handmade uh, desire and effort to connect with friends at that age. And then I continued to stitch and sew. And even to this day, now that it's winter, I start bringing out scarves and things that I don't use. And I begin stitching them with, sometimes I write a word and I sew it on, I applique it. Sometimes I just do a little embroideries, or I'll find an applique that I want to put on, or I'll cut up a piece of fabric and put flowers on a scarf. But I find like my hands really need to do that in the winter, number one, to stay warm. And number two, I end up making all these little gifts and I love to share them throughout the sort of the season where we're not outside and gardening and that kind of thing. I want to be making things with my hands inside in the winter.
And Sandra, I like to finish out the interview by asking the same question I always ask to all authors or illustrators or artists that come onto the podcast. It's open-ended, introspective, and it's to let you give your final words on anything you'd like to talk about as far as your work. And that is, Sandra, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as an author, an illustrator, or an artist?
I hope that my work shares love in its core. I hope that it is a conduit for one person to give to another person, from one heart to another, to let them know that they care, that they believe in them, that they're valued. I want people to be seen and to be valued. And I hope my work at its very heart and everything I do does that. And it can be not just my books. Of course, the books are designed for that purpose, but it could be the brownie that I make when my friend isn't feeling well, or the chicken pot pie that I cook, when someone's daughter's having surgery, or the flowers I cut in my garden and leave at the end of the driveway for somebody who's walking by. There's so many ways for us to share what's in our heart and express concern and love and kindness and generosity of spirit. And I believe more than ever, we need that, on our planet and in our communities and in our families. So I just hope that my work is a gentle reminder that it's a simple and easy thing to do, is to just acknowledge another human being, see them, let them know you care, and do that in your own unique way.
Thank you. That was an interview with Sandra Magsamen. You can learn more about Sandra and her work at sandramagsamen.com. Next, we'll be looking at some new releases, but first, if you appreciate the work being done on the Book Fair podcast, there are a number of ways to show your support. First, you can like, comment, or follow wherever you are currently listening to help push the podcast to new listeners. Second, you can follow the podcast on Blue Sky at Book Fair Pod, or go to patreon.com/thebookfair. The Patreon is where you can find episodes posted early, as well as links to news sources used throughout the show. Lastly, the best way to help the Book Fair podcast grow is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Now, on with the show. Next, let's take a look at some new releases, starting with The Adventures of Cipollino by Gianni Rodari, translated by Anthony Sugar and illustrated by Dasha Tolstikova. The wry text presents the satirical adventures of young Cipollino, which means little onion, one of the 7 brothers living in a whimsical world populated by anthropomorphic fruits, vegetables, insects, and animals. The story begins when Cipollino's father accidentally offends the land's tyrannical governor, Prince Lemon. Papa Cipollone's resulting unjust prison sentence inspires the youth to leave home on a mission to free his father and others who have been unfairly jailed. Cipollino settles in a new village as an apprentice cobbler to Master Raisin, but quickly makes an enemy of Cavalier Tomato, a henchman of the local Contessas of Cherry Tree. Cipollino's campaign to save the villagers from the Cavalier's revenge is soon complicated by the arrival of Prince Lemon and his ludicrous court dignitaries. The illustrator portrays the absurdity of Cipollino's quests through emotive, mostly lineless, watercolor illustrations of the fruits and vegetables, which are peppered throughout the book. This book is recommended for ages 9 to 14. Next is The Library of Lost Girls by Kristen Pips. Our main character is 16-year-old Gwendolyn Donovan. She is devastated when her formerly feisty older sister, Izzy, returns home to Manhattan after 4 years at the Delphi School for Girls as a vapid socialite with inexplicable memory gaps. When Izzy uncharacteristically marries a virtual stranger shortly after, Gwen engineers her own conscription to Delphi. She is desperate to learn what was done to her sister, and more importantly, how to reverse it. Once at Delphi, Gwyn discovers a truly unsettling place. Students are confined year-round to a largely windowless manor where bookshelves hold off-limit volumes that supposedly symbolize the history of the girls who came before. Disobedient pupils get sent to the writing room for a grueling punishment that they promptly forget. A punishment meant to pull the evil from their veins. It quickly becomes clear that something predatory hides in the shadows here. Upon making friends and developing a crush, Gwyn redoubles her efforts to uncover Delphi's dark truth. But dangerous forces are determined to stop her. Gwyn's indomitable spirit and candid first-person narration enrich this feminist gothic horror, heightening the suspense and injecting a lot of heart into the story. It's a twisty plot with genuinely creepy trappings that will absolutely command the reader's attention. This book is recommended for ages 12 and up. Next is Quiet Crossings by debut author Vivi Partridge. We meet Selena, a cautious teen who crashes her truck and finds herself stranded. She stumbles upon a countryside inn, an unusual establishment purportedly located right at the edge of the world. Here, departing visitors embark on a one-way ferry to the mysterious Great Unknown. Alice, the inn's bubbly clerk, offers Selena room and board while she repairs her truck, provided Selena runs errands around the property. As time passes, Selena befriends the inn's quirky inhabitants, including stylish elderly Iris and wary teenage newcomer Lily, who encourage Selena to stay as long as she'd like. But something about the robed ferry operator, Sharon, and the portentous intermittent ringing of a dinner bell sets Selena completely on edge. This book draws readers into this alluring world using softly inked lines and cozy earth tones. It's a place where tea is poured with great care and unspoken questions linger in the halls of this quaint yet ominous way station. Beneath the surface-level charm of the impish, sentient mushroom creatures that frolic about the inn's fields, and Sharon's sometimes comical silence, is a profound meditation on grief and letting go. This book is recommended for ages 13 and up. And our last new release this week, Zoran Walks New York by Millie Von Platten. This is a playful book that takes direct inspiration from the 13-mile summer 2025 Manhattan campaign walk of mayoral candidate Zoran Mamdani. The illustrations immediately catch the eye. Thin-lined, bold-hued artwork nods to the look of Mamdani's famous political posters, using a vibrant palette drawn straight from New York's visual culture, like bodega signs and yellow cabs. The subject, Zoran, affably strolls, cheers, and occasionally boogies through the city, always wearing the same slightly rumpled black suit, blue tie, and blue sneakers. The minimalist text warmly refers to Zoran's city, noting things like, in Zoran's city, there are new things to do at every crosswalk. But what really emerges in this fond portrait is a bustling metropolis that belongs to everyone. We see that everyone is always on the move as Mamdani greets folks beneath an elevated train. Back matter includes further details about featured locations, and this book is recommended for ages 4 to 8. Rounding out this podcast with some news, starting with an update to the New Braunfels ISD closure of school libraries. Last week on the Book Fair podcast, we covered Texas Senate Bill 13, which required schools to be free of objectionable material. This resulted in one school district in New Braunfels to close all middle and high school libraries until after a manual review of all titles to confirm compliance with the new state law. Only 10 days after the board voted to close school libraries, the New Braunfels Independent School District Board of Trustees unanimously voted to reverse the decision. As of this last week, Monday, October 27th, students in middle and high schools throughout New Braunfels ISD will be able to gain access to their libraries again. The decision to close libraries came after SB 13 went into effect, which mentions restrictions of harmful, indecent, and profane material, but only to define them as references for a district's policies on acquiring new books and responding to book challenges. The initial decision was a precautionary step that the New Braunfels ISD was not required by state law to take. After only an hour of public comments and less than 2 hours of deliberation in closed session, the board voted unanimously to reopen school libraries while the district's review of over 195,000 titles continues. An 8th grade student named Amelia was one of the 40 people that signed up to speak at the board meeting. She said, quote, "Closing libraries has made a negative impact on both the teachers and students in our school. There may be some kids in our school whose only access to books is through the school library." End quote. A father spoke as well, saying, quote, "I wish you had experienced the anguish in my daughter's face the other night when she told us the library is going to close." End quote. A statement by the board put out after the meeting claims that the preliminary review of books has been completed, though it is unclear how the district conducted this review or who made the decisions relating to the 5 different school campuses that were affected by the library closures. New Braunfels ISD has also released a list of 81 titles that have been removed. Among them are commonly banned titles like All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and even Safe Sex 101 and Overview for Teens by Margaret O. Hyde. Out of all 81 titles, only 5 were from middle school libraries, meaning that almost all books being pulled are from high school shelves. Community members will also have the opportunity to appeal the removal of any book that they believe complies with SB 13 and should remain in school libraries through the grievance process available on New Braunfels ISD's website, where the list of titles can be found. Next, an Arkansas school district orders teachers to hide LGBTQ books on a reading platform. A letter was sent out by administrators for teachers to hide LGBTQ-related books on the reading platform Epic, which is an e-book service available for students. The letter states that some materials on Epic may not align with the diverse belief systems of district families. It instructs staff to hide or block titles, including Pride Puppy, The Mother of a Movement, and Jacob's Room to Choose. One parent responded to the letter saying, quote, "I think one of the beauties of public school is that kids are exposed to a lot of different ways of thinking." End quote. Superintendent Gregory Piluski said he wants families to know he cares about them and their children's education, but he also has to comply with the law. North Little Rock School District will be holding a school board workshop with public comment on November 6th. Hopefully, more families and community members will speak out against censorship on behalf of students. Next is a heartbreaking story out of Chicago, where school board members are concerned for students' safety. Members of the Chicago Board of Education are demanding virtual learning for students after continuous raids by Immigration and Customs Enforcement throughout the city. Members spoke at a board meeting just hours after a 17-year-old high school student was arrested at an ICE protest on his way to school. This story comes after the deployment of the National Guard in Chicago, as well as ongoing escalation of ICE presence across the city. The student was later released without charges, but the fears of students being targeted are growing. A teacher told local news, quote, "I marked a student absent, not because he was sick. It was because ICE had snatched him up on his way to school. It's a sense of unease, anger, and frustration. It's a lot of students calling in or parents saying, 'I don't feel safe.'" End quote. While Chicago Public Schools currently does not have the authority to make virtual learning an option, Governor J.B. Pritzker could authorize virtual learning for the district in the case of an emergency. Then CPS could implement a remote learning plan. But until the governor calls a state of emergency, they do not have the ability to send the district into remote learning. The Chicago Teachers Union is also arguing for virtual options. A representative said, quote, "When a child stays home because their route to school feels unsafe, that's not an attendance problem, that's a failure of protection. I'm hearing from educators whose classrooms are half empty because families are scared." End quote. And now, taking a look at some more positive news. A Texas law requiring booksellers to rate the content of books has been ruled unconstitutional by a federal judge. The Reader Act was passed in Texas during the 2023 legislative session and has been tied up in courts ever since. There are two components to the Reader Act. First is a manual created by the Texas State Library and Archives Commission that outlines acceptable materials for school libraries, which would then be approved by the State Board of Education, which is entirely made up of appointed members. Second is a requirement that any book vendor selling materials to schools must rate the content of the books they sell. This would require vendors to recall any previous sales deemed unlawful, and all vendors would need to submit their ratings to the Texas Education Agency. So far, it sounds similar to review boards like the ESRB for games or MPAA for movies. However, there is one major distinction. Those ratings wouldn't have to remain as submitted by vendors. The state of Texas could decide whether to list those vendors as compliant with the law or to override their ratings with its own. In other words, instead of an independent review board, the state of Texas, using a board of political officials appointed by the governor, will be able to unilaterally decide which titles will be marked as appropriate for students within the state. The bill was first blocked by a lawsuit brought on by the American Booksellers Association, Texas Bookstores, the Association of American Publishers, the Authors Guild, and the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. Judge Albright of the U.S. District Court of the Western District of Texas has ruled that the second provision of the Reader Act is unconstitutional. In the decision, the judge writes that the Reader Act, quote, "compels plaintiffs' speech when they would choose to remain silent, because plaintiffs must assign ratings even if they would not want to." Second, Reader compels plaintiffs to adopt the government's speech because the Texas Education Agency is allowed to re-rate books and publish its own rating as being attributed to the plaintiffs. Plaintiffs would have no choice but to accept the government's speech as their own. End quote. The state of Texas can appeal the decision, raising it to the Fifth Circuit courts, and it's safe to assume that the appeal will be made. But for now, the Reader Act has officially been blocked and will not be going into effect. And if it does escalate, we can hope that higher courts uphold Judge Albright's decision. And lastly, a Virginia school board seeks permission to hold standardized tests in other languages. There are many states in America that offer alternatives for non-English speaking students or for students with English as a second language. However, it is not across the board. Some states even used to have English-only laws, where tests would not be available in different languages. Even without these laws, many states still only issue standardized tests in English. A bill introduced in Virginia this year in the state legislature would have prioritized efforts to making tests available in other languages. It passed the State House of Delegates, but failed in the Senate. This takes us to Arlington School Board, which is seeking authorization from the State Department of Education to administer tests, despite the bill's failure. They still could legally issue tests in any language, but without the state's education department supplying these tests, their effort to provide them would be completely futile. The Virginia Department of Education estimates that the annual cost for implementing 2 additional testing languages would range from $3.7 to $8.5 million for the entire state. So the Arlington School Board is putting forward a funding proposal to administer the tests only within the district, which would cost far less than the millions projected by the state board. School board members supporting this proposal are fighting for more fair and equitable testing. The currently available tests in Virginia provide a barrier to students learning English as a second language and do not accurately reflect their academic abilities. Whether there are laws in place, there are other states where testing is only available in English. So hopefully, Arlington School District can set an example for other school districts or state legislators to offer more testing languages in the future. This will conclude another episode of the Book Fair podcast. If you'd like to learn more about any of these stories, you can check out patreon.com/thebookfair. There you can find episodes posted early, as well as links to news sources used throughout the show. If you like the work being done on the Book Fair podcast, the best way to show your support is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Thank you so very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk to you next time.